I'm a tech support at this point, but I'm actually transitioning into the marketing writing position, so I'll be doing a little bit more of that. I've been at Paladin for 2 years now, this month actually. Today's webinar is Unraveling the Mysteries of Inventory Control, Part 2. The description, essentially what I'm going to go over, we're going to really start to talk in depth about the suggested order report. I'm going to break it down for you. I'm going to show you how to read it, how to understand it, and then we're going to work on cleaning up your inventory a little bit to make the suggested order report look exactly the way you're wanting it to look, to eventually go in to make a purchase order and make your ordering process more streamlined and simplified. The audience and technical level is both for hardware and pharmacy. Okay, the technical level is going to be about an intermediate. The goal of the Paladin webinar series is to give you an advanced training medium to aid in evolving the use of Paladin system to make your stores even more successful. For this presentation, I want you to be able to walk away with understanding the suggested order report when you look at it and really knowing what the columns mean and how to get your inventory kind of tight-niched into where it needs to be to streamline this process. Okay? How this webinar is going to work, I'm being assisted by Mr. Chad Klein. He's going to be responsible for recording the webinar, and then he will also participate in any questions at the end of this webinar if we have any. Okay? Everyone will be in listen-only mode by default, and we have the power to unmute certain people or everyone if deemed necessary. At the end of the presentation, there will be a quick survey. Please go ahead and answer those few questions. It'll help us and help me improve future webinars, and the feedback is always appreciated. If you missed some of the presentation, and for those of you that cannot attend, the webinar can be replayed at paladinpointofsaleallspelledout.com/webinars. A copy of the presentation can be downloaded from the same location as the webinar replay. All right, let's go ahead and begin. As I stated, this is going to be an intermediate technical level, Unraveling the Mysteries of Inventory Control, Part 2. Okay, the agenda for today. What we want to do, we want to go ahead and define what our inventory and ordering goals are. It's important to find a good starting place for the suggested order. It can get a little overwhelming if we don't have that. Okay. I'm also going to show you how to maintain your inventory properly for the suggested order report. I'm also going to refer to the suggested order report as SOR, so it's the same thing when I talk about it, okay? And then we're going to break it down, and I'm going to explain it kind of column by column, and I'll bring up an example of the SOR inside the system, so you'll know how to run it inside Paladin and then how to break it down and actually know what you're looking at. So first we want to talk about our goals, okay? We want to streamline the ordering process. We want to understand the SOR to optimize your store's ordering. We want to start practicing that as soon as today. And then we're going to identify the most common areas where inventory may fall short as far as setup goes inside Paladin, so we can clean that up and we can make your SOR look nice and pretty and good for ordering for you. So where do we start? Okay, finding that starting point. It's really important to not be discouraged by past attempts. A lot of people have seen the SOR and they get a little scared, a little nervous, wondering it's kind of messed up at the beginning because they don't really know where to start. So then they just put it on the back burner, which then in turn causes them more wasted time. Okay, we want to start the process as early as now. Right when we get off this webinar, while this information is fresh in your mind, you guys want to go ahead and try to get this going as soon as possible. You want to figure out what exactly your goals are with the SOR and then create a plan, and I'm going to help you do that. And it actually is important to even print out your SOR every week and look at the progress so you can feel some sort of accomplishment as you look at this week by week, because this will be a time-lengthy process. Okay? We want to make a commitment when we are doing this SOR. Now, when I say commitment, when I work with my customers on this, I usually schedule them out once a week for 4 weeks. So they have a minimum month-long commitment with me, and every week we go over something different in the SOR to get it cleaned up. And by that point, it usually is at a good starting point for at least 1 or 2 departments or locations, if not the entire SOR at that point. Okay, it's okay to go slow. We want to start out with the smaller ones, not take on the whole SOR report at one time. That can be really, really overwhelming. So we want to make sure that we stay on track with that kind of thing. Okay. Getting other team members on board. Now, when it comes to the SOR, obviously, you're not going to need just the standard cashier for something like this. You're going to want your managers and the people who do this regular ordering to really understand the SOR along with you. And you really do want to document this process for when managers move up in your store and then maybe they start to do ordering. It's really important to have this documented. And then you want to be consistent, whether it's the same time and day every week or the same day every week or even just the same actions. You want to make sure that you get into that routine with the SOR. That's really important. So where do we begin? Okay, we're going to run a suggested order report. We're going to start with one department or location. We're going to choose one of the problem, so to speak, identifiers, and then we're going to start to fix those part numbers. So I'm going to pull up Paladin here, and I'm going to show you guys how to run a suggested order report within one department or location and what that looks like, okay? Let me pull up Paladin here. So inside Paladin, we're going to go up to the report section, inventory, purchase order, and suggested order report. Then we're going to hit next. And then here, as you can see, you can limit it by part number, department, supplier, class, subclass, and location. For this example, let's just do one department, and let's do the household department, just something nice and small. Okay. When you pick your first department or location to run by you, you usually don't want to go with the biggest one because you very easily could get overwhelmed. So we want to start with something small. Okay, and then we hit F12 or the Run Report button. And it's going to pop it up in a nice little PDF form here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, for example, this only has 4 parts on it, so it's a good place to start to get an idea and to get you practicing and to look at the suggested order report on what it's going to look like and what we do to clean it up. Okay, so that's how you run the report. I'm going to show you examples of some problem identifiers here in just a second. I'm going to minimize this real quick. All right, so breaking down the SOR. I'm going to go through what all these sections mean, how do you even read this report, and we're going to explain each column and how to get the best ordering for your store from this report. Okay, so we're going to go back to the SOR. Okay, here's the standard SOR. There's a few different things that I'm going to point out, okay, that we're going to go through. Some of this is fairly self-explanatory, others not as much. First, I want to point out numbers 1 through 13. Okay, these numbers represent a 4-week time period, not every month. So with the way you break down weeks in a year, right, there's 13 4-week sections. So that's what this is. So keep that in mind. The report isn't messed up. It's not saying you have 13 months. Okay, so when you look at that, just keep that in mind. Now, this here, fairly self-explanatory, but we're going to go through it, okay? Your record number is your part number. Your description is your description of the part. Last received. This is when you either have received it manually, via PO, or EDI. However you can receive it inside Paladin, it's going to record that for you. Okay. Number here, order number 1. In Paladin, under the inventory module, you have 2 places for suppliers. This is supplier number 1, and then supplier number 2. Last count is when you've either hit the count button inside Paladin to adjust your shrinkage, or you've done it with the RF gun. That's what that means here, okay? SOH, of course, is your stock on hand right here. On order, if you already currently have any on order. And then quantity required. Now, I want to especially point this one out. Quantity required is actually the number that will be transferred over into the purchase order for when you do your ordering, which is something I'm going over in next week's webinar. Okay, order required, that's going to be what Paladin is suggesting that you order. Next section here, supplier ratio. If there's a supplier ratio, it's going to show here. If there is none, it simply says 1. Okay. The demand, that is based off of your sales history. It's showing and explaining, okay, based off of the length of time, how much minimum, how much maximum you have, how many you have sold. It's saying that there is a demand of 1. Supplier quantity. This is going to be, this specifically is talking about a supplier ratio part number. So for example, if you have a 250-foot roll of wire that you have to order by the roll, which is 250 feet, but you sell it by the foot, supplier quantity is what Paladin uploads and the conversion is. So for example, in Paladin, here you would put 250, but then the supplier quantity is just going to be 1 because it's 1 roll of 250. Okay. And then over here are your sales. You've got your average, your last, and your market costs here. And then over on the far right, okay, is going to be your sales. So in this 4-week period, there were none sold. Same with 2. And then the third 4-week period, there were 2 sold, 2 sold, 1 sold, and 1 sold. Okay, that's how you're going to take a look at your full sales history to take a look at that. Kind of some tidbits behind the scenes that's really good to know, especially if you're a little more on the technical mind of things, but also just so you understand where some of these numbers are coming from. Okay. An item will only show up on the suggested order if it has a sales history within the last year. That's important to know. It's a brand new item. It may not show up on the SOR quite yet. Okay. To order the next order quantity, you must have a need greater than 2/3 of that order quantity. So for example, if an item has an order quantity of 10, then there needs to be a need greater than 6.66 before it's going to even order another 10 for you. The suggested order pulls from the adjusted quantity for its calculations. And then an item will show an adjusted quantity of 0 if it's on a sales list during that transaction. The SOR does take into account if something is on sale. It makes it show, and it is going to calculate the fact that it was on sale, so the sales may be a little bit spiked versus a normal everyday sale of that item. The problem identifiers that we're talking about, that we're going to talk about a little bit. Okay, we have special orders, min-max quantity locked, supplier ratio, exceptional sale, and order quantity. I'm going to go down and break through these with you guys to kind of know what to look for within that suggested order report. Okay. First one, items that should have been a special order. Only showing 1 or 2 ordered in the past year. And how we fix that, we set the max quantity to 0 and we lock it. Now, a lot of suggested orders have this because a lot of people don't realize that we have the special order feature inside Paladin, and that's really how you should be using special orders versus just putting it in your inventory and ordering it. That puts it on the SOR. So what we can do, if you have a lot of these, we can do this in bulk with some data work. We can set the max quantity to 0 and lock this for you to keep it off of the suggested order report if you know for a fact it is a special order and you don't want it to show and you don't want it to go on that purchase order. Now, since this is data work, okay, there is a fee for it. It's usually about $95 an hour to go ahead and do the data work. It usually only takes about an hour. So what I want to do, I'm going to go over into the suggested order again, and I'm going to show you what this would look like. So for example, this part number here, 351081. Okay, as you can see, over this 13 4-week period, there were only 2 sold. So this very well could be a special order. This is how you look at that to see if there are special orders. When 1 was ordered, essentially over a year's plus time, most likely it's a special order, and you're going to want to go into each of these individual items, set the max quantity to 0 and lock it. That's going to allow it to no longer show up on the suggested order report. And then moving on to the next one, supplier ratio issues. This is another one of the really, really common ones that I see within our customers that I help them with all the time. Okay, supplier ratio can be very complicated. And so to get it nailed down to where it's going to show correctly on the suggested order report is kind of a fine science. So there's a few things that we want to go ahead and look for when we're looking at these supplier ratio issues. The cost is bigger than retail. Your stock on hand, has a decimal. Okay, you have a stock on hand that you know is wrong. So for example, going back to that 250-foot roll of wire, but your stock on hand says you only have one. So this is going to be very specific to stores. There are some stores that buy the 250-foot roll of wire, and they only sell it in the 250-foot roll, and you're going to know that your stock on hand of one is correct. Now, the people that break that down, it should say 250 in your stock on hand and not one. So that kind of pertains per store, but you're very much going to know. So you want to take a look at that. And then what you're going to do, you're going to want to go into the inventory module and change the supplier ratio and look at that ordering information. So for example, inside Paladin here, in the inventory, let's go ahead and pull up a random part here. Excuse me. And then here under order control, right, this is where you would change that. You would take a look at your order quantity, your min, your max, your supplier ratio, and determine if it needs to get changed. The two biggest ones you want to look for in that suggested order report is the cost is bigger than retail and your stock on hand has a decimal. Chances are if your stock on hand has a decimal, it's probably a supplier ratio issue because in theory, stock on hand will never have a decimal. And then another one is an exceptional sale. Okay, if you see order history on an item and it's been pretty consistent, and then all of a sudden it jumps drastically, whether it's up or down, it's most likely an exceptional sale. Now, to tell the computer not to factor this into the calculations, you're going to go into the inventory module, recall that item. On the inventory tab, click the magnifying glass next to the sales figures, find the transaction with the exceptional sale on it, and change the adjusted quantity to a smaller number or to 0. So what that looks like here, inventory, okay, and the magnifying glass next to sales figures, right here, there's going to be adjusted quantity, and you can actually change that. You can literally manipulate that, and that's going to adjust your SOR to a little more to what it needs to be, because you're telling Paladin, hey, look, this happened to be a sale that my store was running because it was a snowstorm hit, and I put 20% off on ice melt or something of that sort. And then the sales jumped, but it's not an accurate reflection of what this part number usually does, and I need it to go back to that accurate reflection. That's what that part's going to do for you. Oh, there we go. Okay, and then order quantity. A pack quantity on items, and the suggested order will order it in those quantities if you tell it to. Okay. Look for items with high order quantity on the SOR. So in that, I'll show you here in a second, in that order quantity section, if it's something like 20 or 30, that's going to kind of be a red flag for you. You could be very easily overstocking yourself when you don't need to. So what you can do, you can review those items, and if your supplier says no, you have to buy them in 20, but you really only need about 5, a lot of times you can do that broken case, essentially, and break that down and only purchase 5 of them. So for the order quantity, okay, when you're going to order it, right, it may say a really, really high number here of 20 or 30 when you really only need 5. And that's where you can go back into the inventory module and take a look, and you can also talk to your supplier and say, hey, is it possible to only order 5 of these, you know, break the case instead of 20, because there's no need in overstocking your store of those 15 items just to buy the 5. That's kind of a, you know, a waste of your guys' time and money. And then we've got min-max locked. This is also a fairly common one. A lot of people use these min-max locked to think that they can tighten down their ordering when it's actually doing more harm than good on this kind of thing. Okay, so the min display is the amount, just to clarify, it's the amount that you'd like to order over the amount that you need. So let's say you have an end cap that has a whole bunch of bags of ice melt and you need 10 bags on that end cap at all times. Well, that minimum should be 10, but then you need to order what you actually need. So if you need a full pallet, you know, if there's 50 on a pallet, you need to order 50 on top of that 10 that is always going to be there. Okay, this can directly cause overstock and strange numbers to be seen in your SOR. If you have the minimum locked, thinking it's what you need to order at all times, you can easily double your needed inventory, because a lot of people mistake the minimum display for what you're actually ordering, when in all reality it's 2 separate entities. And then having the max lock can actually limit and do the opposite. Okay? It can limit your supply that may actually be needed. So in other words, you could have a shortage on a popular item that you may not have, you know, have a need for shortage on, which can cause customers to go to another store if you don't have it. So you really want to make sure that you're not limiting yourself on that max as well, unless it is a special order item that we talked about. So going back to the suggested order real quick, okay, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out. I pointed out the special orders, right, when there's only 2 here in this entire year, or when there's only 1 in this entire year. That's most likely going to be a special order item. Okay. And then there's another part here. Let's say for the min and the max. This is fairly standard. Min of 0, max of 999. That's default inside Paladin. Let's say that these are different. So I have an example sitting in front of me that the minimum is 4 and the maximum is 6. And then I have another one. The minimum is 3, the maximum is 5. That is most likely your min-max locking problem. It's fairly strange to have a minimum of 4 but only a maximum of 6. Why would you need to order minimum 4 at all times but only, or have no more than 6 in your store? That usually tells me that something is locked in Paladin that really shouldn't be. So you really want to take a look at those things. Okay. So with all of those things said, what you want to do, you want to start with one department, one location, run this suggested order report. You can always come back and listen to these webinars if you are unclear as far as what other problems you need to look for. But you start with that. That's going to really start to help you maintain your inventory and go from there to tighten down this SOR and to get it where it needs to be. So that's the end of the webinar. Okay, next week you get the joy of listening to me again. Okay, we're going to do part 3, Unraveling the Mysteries of Inventory Control, part 3, and it's going to be piggybacking off of this one. So what it's going to do, once we get the SOR kind of tightened up and you do some of these things that I've instructed you to do, essentially you have this next week to get some of it done. What we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to get the suggested order report into the purchase order, how to send it, how to receive it, and get those things done. Okay? Do we have any questions?
Not at this time.
All right, thanks guys so much.